Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone.
Right up, Matt Shot. Damn.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. It is that time, Fireside Chat with Matt Lee, and this time we are talking about, should we talk about Control 4 or should we skip to something else?
You know, I tossed this around this morning. I think it's 4. I think we should, just because we should at least get through the 6 building blocks, right? I think you and I kind of agree that getting through 1 through 6 are kind of at least the core functions you have to understand, if that makes sense, right? And so I think that 4, even though it is kind of one that will be a little bit shorter for us to talk about, I think just because otherwise we'd have to boil the ocean getting down into all of 4. But yeah, I still think it's 4.
Okay, so let's set the stage for those that don't know. Security configuration or baseline configurations is largely what Control 4 is about. It does have safeguards in all 3 implementation groups, but I think it's one that gets a little bit, we have a tendency to be dismissive of it because it's like, well, I'm gonna, automatically set the configuration based on what the current today, Tuesday is, and the Lenovo laptop that I just bought. So like, it's already starting at a new baseline than what I had as far as golden images and a logic process. I think that largely was prevalent, 10, 15 years ago, where golden images didn't have a lot of change on a frequent basis.
Yeah, I mean, genuinely they did, but they had golden image, drift, reboot, golden image, drift, right? Like it's not this constant state management. It's just the well, something's messed up. Let's just reboot that virtual machine and get it back. But
well, and in that vein, think about like the new approach that we've seen with Apple. They call it the rapid response security rollouts, where previously you're like, wow, this really is kind of buggy and maybe bad for security purposes. But in September, and right now it's March. In September, I know they'll release an update that will probably address this, maybe.
Yeah. Now it's faster. But genuinely, Control 4 simply is the very top level, secure configuration of enterprise assets and software. There's no comma, but I hear it in my head. And I want people to understand assets are assets. An asset is a software asset. An asset is a physical asset. They're both denoted as such, but they want to make sure and specifically call this out as the top category. And what it basically says is establish and maintain, secure configuration of enterprise assets, end user devices, space, including portable, space, and mobile. So they're making sure you're thinking of the laptop, network devices, non-computing, IoT devices, and servers. And then after they do this parenthetical escapement, they say, and software, parenthetical entrance, operating systems, and applications in parenthetical.
Yeah, they get a little bit loosey-goosey on what's being included. But what's, to your point about like mobile and laptop, is kind of ironic that I watched this YouTube video of a guy who's like frustrated with his MacBook Pro. So he took a Mac Mini and then used some like CNC and
I remember that.
3D printers and he's like, and it flips open and all I got to do is carry my little Mac Mini and I got a 10-inch screen. I'm like, who functions like that? Like, he's the guy at Panera back in the day that had the 30-inch screen sitting on the booth table so that he could be mobile.
I want to speak to something in this though, because I think this need to say portable and mobile
is irrelevant.
Well, but it comes from a world, and I think this is me looking back in the window, but it comes from a world when you thought if they were in your network and never left, those things were secure. They were protected by the walled garden. And the only ones we need to think about encrypting the hard drives on and protecting and hardening is when they go out in that big bad world out there, right? When they might get in trouble.
When you're not behind the firewall anymore.
Yeah. And I think this is a bit of that remnant, but I don't want to beleaguer the point. Like I said,
but no, I think it's important because I think what we're highlighting here is that secure configurations are here to stay. They are extremely important, and we should not be dismissive by saying, oh, well, I'll just download the latest version when it's time to deploy whatever.
Yeah. And if you tackle like IoT devices and servers, and you remember, I always say, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Right. We know that there's a good part of this of saying, I have IoT devices. Maybe I'll change it off of admin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when some bloke like Matt that's doing a pen test or a threat actor finds it and goes, admin, that's it. We're good, boys. We've got it. Like that's when we talk about secure configuration, that's some componentry of that. And so when you get into 4 and you start reading in the actual safeguards, and remember the way Chris and I think about, safeguards, the way you and I talk about this is safeguards are going to be something that help give context to the underlying control and are pragmatic things that you should be thinking about.
They prevent the control from tipping over and losing relevance, right? They're
That's
what, because I think without that, so I want to do this before we get too far into this. Let's split this into two things, because I think if we talked about this 20 years ago, we would all talk about the same things and we'd all be pretty much on the same page, because we didn't have IoT, at least not in the context like we do today.
Sure.
And the ease of use of
nor
what
the
gets
proliferation.
deployed. your Raspberry Pis, the
I have
Echo
5
Dots
in this room right now,
right, that are listening to what we're saying.
100%.
And I have it's coming up with ChannelCon. We've got a panel where I'm moderating questions about IoT and IIoT. And what's really interesting today is that we have to remember that those other categories, IoT, IIoT, we're talking about straddling the physical and cyber world. So when you think about devices like a hot water heater or a thermostat or fill in the blank, we're talking about those two in this conversation.
Yeah. And when you think about that, my friend Sam Alva over at CISA, gave some window into that world of, a lot of the fear is that these OT things become a lot of the weaponization of things, right? If I can make your hot water heater fail safe, not happen or explode, right? I mean, I'm being a little hyperbolous, but the point is there's a lot of things that move that can create challenges in our world that are controlled by Internet of Things. And to your point, or OT by that definition.
I saw a wall get taken out by a hot water heater. So
yeah, fair. So the point is, when we talk about this is one of those things where, depending on where you live, and I think the Cloud Companion Guide would be a good way to really think through this.
Sure. That's a great example. Yeah.
When you're in an infrastructural world, I just have way more bolts to turn. So that means if I have a secure configuration that I need to elicit upon something, there are more things that need to be done. It's just from a count perspective, right? There's more plates to spin, is a great way to think about it. And so when you think about something where you're moving over to, CPSM or posture security managers, things like that are all based on just how a cloud configuration is set. And I'm then managing machines vis-a-vis that aspect, right? Let's just say you use Defender for a good majority of the hardening of devices or those type of things. Right. You get into where I think we're seeing a have and have nots forming. Now, I'm not going to say that a Microsoft or someone there is perfect, because we've seen those same failures. It's simply a much more aggregatable throat to choke. As opposed to, me doing it in the way I'm configuring it with thousands more options on my local machine. If I'm setting a setting in the cloud and saying, I want ASR rules enabled or attack surface reduction rules that harden a lot of these actual settings in this, then when I set those ASR rules, they're just going to be enabled. And if Microsoft fails to make them enabled, it doesn't work. Then in which case, I'm sure that's going to wind up in a meme somewhere. So I'm hoping you're going to edit that out, but I doubt you will.
I will not.
But the point is, when we get into this, let's start where it is. 4.1 says, establish and maintain a secure configuration process. So the very entry point of this is, do you even have a process? And I think the reason is, this is the difference between a car mechanic and an airplane mechanic. And I mean this seriously.
I know where you're going with this.
In a car mechanic, if I'm having him torque the brakes and put on the new brakes and make sure they're at the right setting, he's not necessarily, probably 2 times out of 10 in randomness, am I going to get somebody that actually grabs the torque wrench and goes to the set torque spec, or even maybe even looks it up. No, it's a grunt and a nudge. Oh, that's where the gun went stop. But the point is, if you go to an airplane mechanic and you're doing an annual or you're touching something in the motor, they're going to count the twists on bolt number 7 from the distal tip of wing number 2, right? Like, I mean, you know what I mean? They're literally down to that level. And that is the difference in configuration process management.
And it's going to get checked by the next person behind them. Like, it's not going to be like, I just put the lug nut on the tire. It's going to be, I'm checking that the torque is at where he said it was.
I got a buddy of mine in the Air Force got written up for habitually not counting his twists appropriately. That's where the story came from, right? Like,
oh my word.
He failed doing the set portion,
So
service.
In an effort to capture this from a time perspective and kind of shrink it a little bit, let's start with configuration, which is the configuration process is actually 4.1, 4.2, 4 dot like there's like and 9, like they're not all configuration, right? Like
Right.
but the thing to take away from this that's probably the most important is that you have a process in place for how you approach configuring devices, deployment of software, deployment of network infrastructure. Did I miss anything? Like even DNS is important here.
Yep. And they're all in there. And here's the other thing I want to call out in this. This control safeguard set to me is where I pivotally believed now that my paradigm was the controls are the top, and that's what I'm actually trying to do. The bottom is something to give me context. It is not an authoritative list. This is where I first completely believed that.
Yep.
And the reason is, if you look at this, 4.1, secure process, 4.2, maintain a secure network configuration, essentially, which you have to do before we get to 13, which is why 4 is a building block.
Right.
4.3, configure session locking. Why? Because there's some jackleg named Matt that walks around and takes pictures of open laptops in the airports and could steal data.
That's the only reason. And that's the only reason.
There's no risk to your organization.
Right.
No, it's the fact that if I have an unlocked user session, I can become your user in seconds.
And possibly elevate yourself to somebody else's user.
Definitely elevate myself. I wouldn't even say possibly. It's inevitable. It's just a matter
of I just said I wasn't implying that Matt was the one that was at the console driving.
With enough time, not just me.
Right.
For you get on, I do want to go through them because then they say have a firewall on servers, have a firewall on end user devices, securely manage enterprise assets and software in 4.6, 4.7, manage default accounts.
Hold on, before we go too far, let's back up for a second, because you just went really from, we were talking about secure configuration of enterprise assets and software, and when you get to like 4.4, implement and manage a firewall on servers. Well, this can get all kinds of, twisty, loosey-goosey, not torqued enough, because
and it's one of those where I could turn on a firewall and do nothing and help none and open it all up. They don't even say know what you're doing and do it well and manage it towards standards.
Well, to some fairness, turning on firewalls on a server does give some context, because the first thing it's going to do is give you the difference between private, public, and or whatever the third one was. I just domain, right? That's actually an interesting thing, because now it's visibly tracking 3 types of network traffic that gives insight to what's going on. It goes back to audit logs, right? If you don't turn audit logs on, you can't make any educated decisions post.
But I think at this stage, and the understanding that goes beyond that, and I know you're bringing that up exemplarily, but really it didn't matter which one you picked. It's how you set the rules and what you decided to do.
Like, what are you doing?
That's missing here is nothing here says get to a default deny until you get into the end of this second one, which says, which is great, a default deny rule in 4.5 that drops all traffic except those services and ports that are explicitly allowed. So when you're talking about servers and end user devices, you really are saying, don't let Matt use port 4062 or something to egress some command and control traffic. At least force me to hide in 80 or 443 in plain sight. Oh, too soon. I digress. But the point is, as we keep going through these are just pragmatic things that you need to be doing. And are they exhaustive? Heck no. There's so
it is exhaustive, because it says you now have to think. It is saying that we only have so much room, both for this podcast and for the piece of paper that this was written on, right? So in the context of what's been written, it's not exhaustive. In the way it's implied,
that's fair.
It's saying you need to be exhaustive in your approach, or as exhaustive as is reasonably possible with the resources that you have.
And this last one I do want to hammer on a bit. We'll go through a couple more. Device lockout on portable end user devices. This is where they go back to that portable statement again. And they're really saying mobile and laptop needs to have a device lockout. And if I was doing this, they say in here 20 for this or 10 for that. And device lock. What you're really getting at that they're not saying in plain English in my mind is you want cryptographic shredding. So if anybody likes to get definitions out of this and is not familiar, cryptographic shredding is the concept of why we encrypt our devices and why we have things like a TPM. It means that if I get to a state where I do not trust, if I'm a device offline being attacked by Matt with passwords, let's say I stole this at a cafe, then as I'm doing that, they have a feature called TPM hammering, which means as I keep asking and getting it wrong, you could set some clipping levels through software, through the things that are out there to say, destroy the key that you have privately held in the TPM and make it to where anybody with this device has no measure other than attacking the cryptography itself with very large attempt numbers or other methodologies offline with the drive. They're very limited in what they can get as an attack surface. It's almost the same as deleting. If you take your CISSP or CCSP, that is the same as shredding it to the standards of any other standard out there at least from a basic destruction of data perspective. So the point is when they're saying this, you need to be able to either destroy that cryptographically through too many attempts, but that's what we're getting at is you can start setting those kind of concepts to say to someone in a compliance basis, when you had an incident, did I have a breach? And you're talking to the breach counsel and you're getting the forensics back and they say, it looks like the last time this device was seen, it did have this on. These settings were configured properly. It had checked in and passed compliance. If someone's attacking this device while they have it, it is the same as it being destroyed. Right. Now, they also go on in 411 to say enforce remote wipe capability, right? Which is you could take this as a thought process there. I often apply cryptographic shredding capability as that remote wipe, like Intune, destroy device. Even if it's again, from a hash perspective, it'll suck it right back into Intune if you have autopilot. But 412 separate enterprise workspaces on mobile and user devices. This is critical. And it doesn't have to be a separate device. I think people often get this wrong, although it would be great if it was, but they call it out in here. And this is where a SAW or separation of, that's later. That's in 5. Sorry, but
easy, Tiger.
Separate workspaces would be things like enclaves in Android, right? Where you're now using a work profile, I think is what they term it, right? Inside Android. But it's basically saying, don't let people, on their mobile devices have access to that data by some other compromised application or some other compromisation of that phone. I think Outlook does this really well, right? And so it doesn't always have to be a separate full workspace, right? Because what they're saying is you want a separate workspace for that privileged information. But if you look at using like mobile application management policies and saying, I'm not going to allow Apple Mail, sorry, Chris, I'm only going to allow Outlook, then programmatically in Outlook, it can shred that data if told to, right? And you have the ability to destroy company data if someone leaves or if a device is compromised. It also allows you to destroy that data holistically without destroying the phone and the user's information and things on it, right? That's one of the kind of the complications of BYOD. But anyways, what are your thoughts on, I mean, that's really the end of these pretty much for
I think the thing that I struggle with the most is our willingness to follow this. I mean, we've covered a lot of things just now that are very they're very technical, right? Like this is not. I mean, largely you can get a lot of this stuff done, and you don't have to be super technical because you got kind of the wizardy approach. That's you're not deploying.
We just created wizardy.
Wizardy, like you don't have to deploy from command line and know the functions off the top of your head to get some of this stuff done. The GUI interfaces for even Linux has evolved immensely. But I think what I struggle with is that in a perfect space, MSP space, they get configuration right.
Yeah.
We still have a tendency
and automated. Like
fine.
At the end of
the, let's jump to there too.
We're jumping to perfect.
That it's not continually managed to that same bar. Like the bar is whatever the bar got set during configuration. We're not checking that it's maintaining that or exceeding that. We're not continuously improving it.
Well, now you're hitting the nail on the head. When we talk about configuration management in this context, even with them saying a process, it is mainly focused on getting to a state. It doesn't speak on staying to that state. And I think that's where real configuration management, and we'd get into like an hour conversation, is what you brought up just a minute ago, continuous validation of configuration management.
But CIS calls out in the overview for this control that very thing. It literally states that is the starting point within this control of what you need to do, because you must be continually managed to avoid degrading security as software is updated or patched. New security vulnerabilities are reported. Now we're not even getting into what is it, 7?
7 with vulnerability management.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're not even there yet. Like we're talking about this here at secure config.
Right.
So I think it's really important to remember that we're at control 4. And control 4 is really kind of, we were talking about this before, right? Asset inventory, asset inventory, asset inventory. But it's not just knowing what you have, it's knowing what state that asset is in.
Well, it's more than that. It's if you have an asset that you have listed. Why have I listed it? Let's go back to one. Has the ability to touch data.
And
right?
Is it high, moderate, or low risk?
Yeah. And so when you get into that, you have this understanding that if you don't do one well, you cannot do four well. And if you put it in your one and you said, I own this and I'm going to manage it, you will need to have answers for how you securely configure it, how you protect it, how you do things to actually make it as secure as it can be. And I think I'll touch on something else here too, Chris. And this is maybe I'm being an idiot, and you guys can tell me in the comments, please, if you believe that. It's okay.
I don't allow comments for this show. This
Oh,
is
that's
like
smart.
we're
That's smart.
sitting from an
Yeah,
authoritative
yeah.
position here. It's like just no one would ever challenge us.
I think this is one of the most meaningful differences in our day-to-day workload that changes when you start applying principles at the software and at the people writing the hardware load, where you are secure by design and secure by default. If you buy a new car tomorrow, I don't care how bad the car is or what it's done in its safety rating, there's zero chance you're sitting in the driveway with a book going, how do I on this clock face turn on the left airbag? How do I turn? Zero chance. It is never sold with all the safety features there and none of them turned on.
I mean, you just went really far down a rabbit hole, because how many people can set the clock on their car radio?
I can't. So I think the point is, if you look at our software, if you buy a Microsoft tenant, or if you buy Azure resources, or if you buy AWS,
they are not secure by design. They're implied. They are implied that they can be secured.
Default. Right. And that's what I mean. They're not set by secure by default, because the point would be you now have to go find those settings and configure them. And so I think that is also design and
so you're saying, like, the next time I buy an airplane, the brakes are optional.
Yeah. Or at least you have to them up yourself if you're going to use them.
Right.
Like, there, you just
like, what do you mean I have to deploy the landing gear? I can't leave it on autopilot.
Yeah. So I think 4 gets easier because of the pressures that will come to software manufacturers and to hardware manufacturers over the next 4 years. You can maybe make me buy you a coffee if I'm wrong.
But yeah, that sounds really low bar there. Buy a coffee, like.
Well, I didn't
like you're gonna at least buy me a bottle of Weller. I mean, come on, like
the corporate heart to fix this overnight. No, I'm being a little weak.
But I think that right now what we're talking about is the burden of responsibility is currently on either the company that is leveraging the software or us as solution providers. 100%. But what's interesting about the way this control was written, when you get into like the procedural side of this, it's like, determine your risk classification and then create the security configuration scripts so they get deployed appropriately, so on and so forth. But what's really interesting to your point is when you get further down there, it's like, apply appropriate updates to software installed in step 4. Like, it keeps going. Like, it doesn't just stop. Like, you have direct guidance here. Like, it's not rocket science to follow a predefined protocol. Like, literally, if you are following CIS at all, this should be one of the easiest controls to follow a pre-written process and procedures.
True story.
As it pertains to secure configuration, or the idea behind securely configuring software and operating systems.
And it really frames 7, because 7
absolutely
is as the first time we're talking about patching and protecting our stuff. Guess what? 7, if you're finding stuff not patched, you've already failed 4.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because when you get into vulnerabilities, you are now maintaining a unique inventory tied to 4.
Fair. That's fair. No, you're not wrong. Anyways, I guess that's pretty much, I don't want to leave it as if that's pretty much it. I almost want to close this episode out with the concept of, you need to think about where all can you apply a secure configuration process? Where all can you extend that automatedly as much as possible? Where all can you automate those things to validate and find when something fails? Where can you do those things? And so when I think secure configuration process, I genuinely try to think as little number of idiot mats that can fail as I can. And it's as much automated as I can. And you'll see that there's a lot of growth in that systemic space. But my point of this was, go and think about this as not a problem solved by these safeguards, this really is exemplary of, I want you to write your own safeguards of things that I should be doing for secure configuration management across the different platforms that I work
And it's
in.
toolsy, right? Like this, it's funny. We're on Control 4. This is one control that I would be embarrassed to say I don't have tools engaged to help me do this.
100%.
Oh no, I go out on the Microsoft forums and
I
I
click on
check
it myself. Don't worry. I go and validate each.
KBR. Yeah.
No.
Well,
Anyway.
okay, so we're gonna wrap this up because this is each safeguard you could rabbit hole this. Matt, as always, I appreciate you joining me for this fireside chat. And until next time, be safe, have a great week. Hope to see y'all at ChannelCon. Have a nice weekend, people, and week or weekend and yeah, like something.
Oh, weekend. Chris only wants you to have a good weekend.
People, this goes live every time, Tuesday at 4:00. The only thing I care about is that you get to the weekend. What you do with the weekend is your prerogative. So with that, we're out.